Welcome back to yourstory.com. This is the Future of Work event, and today we're going to talk about something interesting. Interesting because it is changing Industry 4.0. We are going to be talking about the future of supply chains, and the theme is frictionless logistics with collaboration. I have an esteemed panel with me, but before that, I want to set the context. Logistics is, not just $1 billion industry, and some reports say it's more than $250 billion in size in our country. To set the context even more, supply chains were already tested by competitive trade wars, and the pandemic made things that much more worse. It's time for companies to get smart and use data-led strategies for growth. Thanks to the pandemic, many global supply chains were not equipped to cope with the world we are entering into. Most of the old systems were engineered to manage stable, high-volume production by capitalizing on labor arbitrage opportunities available in China and other low-cost countries. But even as a sector prepares to navigate through these complexities, the fourth industrial revolution has brought technological advancements to a level never seen before. Things like IoT, artificial intelligence, RPA, drones, seems to catch our verbal fancy. And, but it's become an important time where we have to look at these technologies seriously, and therefore Logistics 4.0, therefore innovation in supply chain procurement management is the need of the hour. To make sense of this, we have our esteemed panel, and let me introduce them. I've got Raghuraman, Head of Supply Chain Strategies at ITC. He's a Senior Supply Chain and Operations Leader with demonstrated strength in integrating supply chain and business strategy to deliver competitive advantage across multiple geographies globally. We also have with us Vishal Sharma, the CEO, Indian subcontinent at Schenker. Schenker, as you all know, is one of the world's top providers of supply chain solutions to global brands, 46 offices in 37 locations, and they manage a lot of warehouses in India. He has experience of working in global continents, probably in Indonesia, Europe, and other places. We also have with us Vikram Janakiraman, the partner and managing director at BCG. Vikram is a specialist for entry strategy, organization design, business strategy and planning, product strategy, supply chain management, financial restructuring, and business process redesign. Finally, we have Swapnil, the largest software-enabled digital freight network. Swapnil brings in 14 years of experience in strategy, operations, and business turnaround. Welcome, guys. I hope that introduction made justice to you guys. Is everyone okay? All well? Show of hands. Great, guys. Guys, I want to, we cannot ignore the pandemic. I want to ask how each of you coped over the last 7, 8 months, 9 months. I want to start with Raghu. Raghu, what was the last 9 months like? What was the situation like for you?
Last 9 months has been very, very interesting, right? But I guess the way I would just picture as it is, most of us have been playing defense and offense at the same time. On the one side is, how do you survive and get out of this? And on the other side is the future looks quite bright, and how do we therefore pivot into the future? I think it's a two-pronged approach, and it's been very interesting.
Interesting. Vikram, how was it for you?
In hindsight, started off with a lot of challenges as we've all faced, but I think there have been both a mixed bag of pluses and minuses. I mean, part of my role is I lead the auto sector as well as the operations practice of BCG. And auto, as you know, has faced significant problems right, across product segments. And supply chains have been struggling with the pandemic and disruption of transportation and so on and so forth. I think on the plus side, the pace of digitization has really taken over, and I think it's very front and center to the topic we're talking about today. So mixed bag, but
yeah, and I know automobiles taken a big hit, right? About you started your career in automobiles, if I remember correctly.
That's
right. Vishal, how was it for you, Schenker? I mean, I think warehousing was so important last year, right? I mean, everybody was moving food. I mean, imagine reaching food to people was so important last year, and I think that's where Schenker would have played a major role.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that as a logistics professional, you spend your life preparing perhaps for the uncertainties, and this was the true test of the mother of all crises you could imagine in supply chain and logistics. So happy to say that I think 2 or 3 things really stood out for us. Our customer solutioning. So we brought in a lot of capacity to assist the businesses, especially on air freight, helping a lot of our healthcare companies bring in and out, also life-saving equipment. So that was very satisfying and that led to really the organization and I think and the industry feeling like they belong as an essential service and gave them much greater sense of purpose. And I would say the last would be the resilience in the organization and the relationships with the customers, going from, I would say, maybe procurement or transactional to being a lot more partnership and solutions driven. So a lot of good and lasting good has come out of the unfortunate events, I would say.
Yeah. I think you're right. If the situation was unfortunate, but a lot of changes that happened, probably changes for the good, and which is why Swapnil, I want you to come in. Must have been a great time for logistics tech companies, right, Swapnil?
Yeah, it is. And beyond logistics tech, or along with it, I think, Vishal, if you think about it, just this is a triumph of science, technology, and engineering is what we've seen over the last 1 year. From the time that vaccine, literally from the first genome sequencing all the way to first rollout was less than 2 months. And what I find incredible is the role of science, technology, and engineering has probably been never realized and pushed to this extent or in the recent times, right? And before logistics, I started as my career as an engineer, and it makes me really happy that as an engineer to see some of the technological breakthroughs that have happened in biotech, overall tech, are incredible. And both personal and professional life, I think it's really made us all question what really matters to you most. Every business has had to think about it, and we all have had to think about it personally as well.
Great, guys. I'm glad everyone of us is safe, and hope your families are safe too. Like getting into the topic of frictionless logistics, I want to start off with Raghu. Raghu, your view on logistics in the country. Somebody was telling me a couple of weeks ago that trucking in India is like a Wild West in America in the 18th century, right? And so how do you look at, when you look at logistics, what is logistics 4.0 and how do you look at the future?
I'll start a bit of a context and then we will see what the future looks like. So, Vishal, what is interesting is logistics has always been a part of human life. Right from the time we became agricultural communities, we started trading. And, if you look at documents, we have been trading for the last 4,000 or 5,000 years. But then, I guess with the advent of industrialization, manufacturing took the front seat because that became the most critical driver of economic value and the entire prosperity which you have seen over the last so many years. But as manufacturing took, and then eventually over the last 20, 30 years as computerization started, I guess there's a lot more focus on first getting the manufacturing processes sorted out. And then we got into the next phase, which was around all, planning and how do you get the planning solutions right. I think logistics is an area from that perspective was slightly lagged behind from a point of view of the development in technology space and the extent of adoption of technology from that perspective as the first way of digitization happened. I guess the second interesting thing which has happened over the last few years is logistics, which was kind of, which was back of the, mind for anyone, has now suddenly become a key source of competitive advantage for any business. And therefore, there is already a gap to catch up vis-a-vis other processes in an organization. And then logistics having become a huge driver of competitive advantage. So there's a much bigger headroom actually to kind of, bridge. And that's where all these digital technologies and everything which is coming in is creating a huge kind of, I would say that a leapfrog effect in the entire logistics space. And the future is looking very, very good for me, especially from a logistics 4.0 perspective. There are various elements to it we can get into, but the context is, I think with all the digitization and various other, IoT technologies and everything which is coming in, I think we are creating an opportunity to significantly, leapfrog. The third interesting element to understand is logistics in itself is a network problem. No company in itself can solve the logistics as a solution. It's a full network effect. The minute you bring in a network effect, then you automatically bring in the power of digital technologies on top of it, which till now we were struggling to enable enough of. But I think with the current way the technology space is moving, I think it unlocks a huge opportunity. So I think it's a perfect time to launch into the future.
You just said context, most of our country is young, so they probably want to associate what is 4.0 compared to what is the past? Are we talking systems? Are we talking integration of those systems in future logistics?
In the past, we have been always working in individual silos, right? A company is a silo. A customer or a supplier of a logistics provider is a silo. There are basically various axes which are there. So there is a carrier as what we call as an aggregator, whether it is a digital or a old-time aggregator. Then you are talking about the trucker himself, who is actually the wheel owner, and most of these are small holders. And it's not that these are people sitting with the fleets. Many of them are small holders. And then you've got the enterprise, which is, or the shipper as what you call. The three of them in the past have been working in silos, and it has led to a lot of economic disparities also by virtue of all of these things. I think what Logistics 4.0 creates is an opportunity where there is an internal collaboration within an organization to significantly reap more value out of logistics as a function. And there is a huge opportunity to bring the outside in through all the digital platforms. So you're almost looking at a seamless, network where the outside comes in, and you're able to create a value chain in that perspective. I think that's what Logistics 4.0 would eventually unlock.
That leads me to Vishal, right? Vishal, from DB Schenker's perspective, how many of them look at this perspective? Given that you serve so many different companies, what is that these companies expect from you, and what is that the industry expects from you, especially when it comes to Logistics 4.0?
So I think there are two types. Historically, there have been two types of companies that look at logistics as a cost, and companies that look at logistics as a core competence, where logistics and supply chain has a seat at the board. A lot of famous examples like a Nike or an Apple. What the pandemic has done is that forced this conversation across industries to really bring about a conversation about that logistics cannot just be about cost, but it has to be a holistic decision, and it has to be a core competence, whether it's around manufacturing or supply chain, and where you're going to buy, how you're going to source, how you're going to supply. And so it's become at the heart of it. And so the first thing that we see the change is that companies now want to partner with the big logistics companies like us to, at a very early stage, at a very conceptual stage, and at a much more upstream thinking about how can we work the whole supply chain in a more holistic manner. So I think that the other thing is, as Raghu was saying, in terms of how the seamless integration takes place and the concept of platforming. So something like what Swapnil's company Freight Tiger does, essentially connecting companies with customers and suppliers and providing an ecosystem. So that's what companies are looking for. People realize they can't do everything in-house. You can't outsource all parts of it. It needs to be a hybrid model, and you need competencies that are able to connect different parts of the ecosystem and work with the company. So I think very much the ability to integrate seamlessly the suppliers, the vendors, the manufacturers at the heart of and integrated with the company strategy. So I think that's how the companies are looking at Logistics 4.0.
When you look at it, you're right. Logistics is about transformation. They need to be, people, leading logistics need to have board seats, because we're talking transformation. Nothing can be left to chance, right?
Right.
So I wanted your quick thoughts on what do you mean by not leaving it to chance? Because most of the operators out there today do not understand the data-led approach, right? A quick thought on that, and then I'll move to Vikram.
I think if you look at, and for good reason, there has been a lot of move towards very procurement-driven supply chains. There are a lot of fat has been taken out of supply chains in many industries, auto being a great example. But again, the experience has thought that you need to build much more redundancy, much more resilience in your supply chain. And by not leaving it a chance, you need to think of scenario A, B, and also a possible scenario C. And I think the stress testing of the supply chains in different scenarios was perhaps not enough leading up to that event, because frankly, we have been in an era of rapid expansion, and and going down the cost curve where logistics and supply chains were concerned. So there wasn't enough need to do that. So I think that's basically what has changed.
Right, from BCG's perspective, right, Vikram, you've worked in supply chain for a very long time. In a sense, you've seen different industries. You've also been at the cusp of technology and supply chain, right? You've seen the two integrate very well with each other. So, from your perspective, 4.0, is it a transformation kind of opportunity that brands have to go through? What increases collaboration, transparency, and integration? Because like Vishal said, a lot of the industry is still disorganized, or unorganized is a better word to use. Go on, Vikram.
No, so that's a great point. I think to understand what Logistics 4.0 can do, you need to understand the problem, right? And I think both Vishal and Raghu laid it out very well, but let me summarize. So if I start with the problem, right? I think the problem today is that if I look at any industry, people are thinking about how supply chains can deliver competitive advantage. The thinking around cost and cost optimization is a thing of the past. Of course, it's important, but now people are saying, can I drive availability, responsiveness? And it's also being inspired by what brands like Amazon have shown us is possible, right? In that context, if you look at the way logistics works, which I would think is the lifeblood of supply chains to a large extent, right? There are two words that spring to mind. It is very unorganized and it is very fragmented. Let me start with fragmented, right? Very small transporters, very small truck drivers, many transporters, many brokers, like lots of shippers, and unorganized because as you put all of them together, there's nothing that really binds them all together other than the power of a phone call, right? There are intermediaries who call each other and literally make this market work, right? So, and as Raghu very rightly said, it's a network problem. This is the kind of network we are dealing with. What does this lead to? And this is where the problem comes up, right? It leads to 3-4 things. One is very high frictions in the market, right? Think of waiting time, the amount of time our trucks are empty on the road, the amount of time a supervisor has to run around looking for the right truck to load the cement, right? And so on and so forth, right? So fundamentally, it's a high friction market, right? Second is it leads to a lot of cost inefficiencies. To use a little bit of data, I mean, if I compare India with the US, right? And the US is a very vast expanse. Trucks travel on average 30 to 40% more time empty than in the US, right? Now, all of this translates to cost. So it's a very high cost inefficiency driven market, right? And the last is the burden on infrastructure. If my trucks are traveling so much unutilized, what it means is I have so many more trucks on the road, congestion, pollution. So if you look at it from a holistic perspective, this is the problem, right? Unorganized market, very fragmented, high friction, high cost inefficiencies, and a lot of infrastructure load. Now, as you think of this is costing the economy big time. You talked about $250 billion. That's about 13-14% of our economy. Most developed economies are about 7%. So that is the inefficiency that in some sense the consumer pays for. This is the problem, right? How do you fix this? It's a distributed network problem, as Raghu very rightly said. And the way to fix this is to really enter players like Swapnil with Freight Tiger and other platforms like this. Can you use the power of data to integrate all these participants, right, on one common platform, drive up information, drive up transparency, give them much faster financing, right? This is the power of Logistics 4.0. You asked the question, what Logistics 4.0 is? I think it's data-mediated transformation. So it's a transformation. It is using data, and it will really move us into the 21st century.
I'm sure that, Vikram, people watching this are all the youngsters who are launching all these D2C brands. And just this morning, right, a couple of D2C brands that I speak to called me and said, we are entering physical distribution now. Now we have to understand the truckers, the warehousing, which is a whole different ball game, right? It's a completely different market out there. And they have to probably listen to this panel. I'm sure Raghu and Vishal can add more light on that. We'll get into it. And Vikram, I'd like your thoughts on that too. How should a young brand look at physical distribution? Like you said, it was a great way to introduce Swapnil because technology is solving that problem too. And Swapnil, from your angle, is the technology platform that you offer to shippers, logistics providers. What are some of the challenges that you saw with brands, and what do you bring to the table that makes them fast and efficient? We were talking about agility was a word used in the IT industry, but I think it applies in distribution and supply chain more so than anything else if you want to stay profitable in the long run.
True. So Vishal, I think what in some ways Vikram, Vishal, and Raghu are saying is logistics ultimately transforms B2B commerce and trade. And often we think about it purely only from a logistics maybe lens. But we all are here in a way to make that B2B commerce really transparent, better, faster. And when a problem is this massive, I believe only technology can help lead the way. And of course, there is a level of operational expertise, on the ground information and experience that you need. But technology is playing a big role. And my learning, to answer your question, has been we know that this problem can be solved through collaboration and at a network level. So historically, if you looked at software platforms, most software platforms rarely had a network component to it. And I think what excites us at Freight Tiger is to build a layer of software which ultimately is creating and empowering an ecosystem and a network at the end of the day. Without the network and ecosystem, I think just the software has very little value, right? And when you want to do that, especially when you're a startup, and today we've grown quite a bit, but if you think about Freight Tiger about 4 years back, when I stepped into these large companies, one of the first questions most people would ask is, why would you be able to solve it? And how do I trust with you with all these different relationships, data, all the stuff that we need to deal with? So to us, the most important thing was to build trust among the stakeholders. And part of that came because we made a very early design choice and we said, look, we want to solve this problem through inclusion. And when the entire world talked about only Uber of trucks or disintermediation, we actually said that we're going to solve this by inclusion. And by solving by inclusion and creating value for all the stakeholders, ensuring you're listening to everyone from the driver, the transport supervisor, to the logistics manager, we were able to gain and build that trust in the ecosystem. And by staying neutral and inclusive is what helped us. So one of our biggest learnings is very counterintuitive because most of the times, the first thing people think about is, let me remove the intermediaries and I'll gain efficiency. And we feel it's not that simple, especially in India, because our market is complex. These layers have been there, they play a role. So to pay, to some extent, respect to that, understand that, and then still build a layer on top of it was not easy. But I think we were quite, so one of our values is grit, and I think we were super patient, thinking long term. We were able to, I think, build this.
Okay, and that's phenomenal because you empowered you, and I like the fact that you said that it's not just about wiping out the intermediaries, but also enabling them to become part of the future, right? That was a very strong point that you made, and I'm segueing into the kind of new jobs, new age jobs that you require in Logistics 4.0, and I want each one of you to talk about what are these.
Before you do that, can I mean, I can't.
Yeah, please, Vikram, please, you should. You should
come in and build on a point that Swapnil made, this point about trust. I think one important factor to realize is why India is, I think, uniquely poised to leverage Logistics 4.0.
Yeah.
Markets haven't gone through this journey yet, to be honest, right? There, the direction they've taken is much, much larger and more organized fleets. India, on the other hand, is a fragmented market, and my view is it will stay that way for a long time to come. So I think this point about how do you use all these assets, drive up utilization, drive up integration, while retaining the unique entrepreneurial spirit that each of these participants bring, requires.
Absolutely.
And I think that's really the opportunity staring us in the face. We can't change the nature of the market to being more organized, to being less fragmented, but we can definitely move it to being more organized. With that element of trust.
That's a great point. So you're not really wiping out anybody. You're going to be more inclusive. The platforms are going to include everybody. And that's a very valid point. So what is the future in terms of what are the new type of jobs that will happen. Raghu, you could give us your perspective from your experience and the way ITC looks at the future of logistics in terms of jobs, the new types of ecosystems and platforms that are coming in place for this.
Yeah. So when you talk about the future of jobs in the logistics industry, I think it's a journey of a few years, maybe a decade or so, but it will significantly shift into logisticians who are doing the job today. Anyone who has you would have anyone doing these kind of roles. I guess it's eventually moving into very clearly an industry where you would have logisticians doing the job, not only inside enterprises, but I guess even in the environment. So whereas the way the shippers think about it and the kind of shippers who would be able to survive, even the truckers getting a bit more data savvy. It's not very far away that a trucker would actually start getting his work from an app and then he's going to work. I think when all these things start getting unlocked, I guess the entire ecosystem would upgrade itself into something which is digitally more savvy. The second thing is, I think significantly it will be built on data. So I think, there's a huge unlock. And, you raised this question, Vishal, and then, Swapnil said this and Vikram also said this. See, what data does in a network situation is simply this. It actually moves the boundaries up to which you can it significantly expands the boundary of your operating zone. So, where you move away from a green zone into a red zone, that boundary gets significantly expanded because data is available. So therefore, data helps you to analyze trends and find out inefficiencies and remove them in advance. Data also helps you to anticipate well in advance. So you are not trying to solve a problem after it has happened, but you're trying to prevent the problem before it is happening. I guess these are all the major things. And today, the kind of chaos, the Wild West problem which exists is basically because of this lack of clarity and data not being there, and so we don't understand what is happening. Everyone is double guessing. Everyone is double guessing themselves. Everyone is double guessing each other. And so that's where the huge democratization effort would eventually come in. And the future would actually be people who can play in this and who would actually be able to create a digitized future. It will clearly migrate there.
Yeah, and Swapnil, perhaps you could add to that point. The open API economy is what's going to change and democratize things, right? More data access, everybody's going to share data. It's going to be a network platform approach. Perhaps Vikram, Vishal, you can also take this too, right? Swapnil, you want to bring in these thoughts and then we can move on. Also want to go into Raghu's points on having specialized logistics managers or logistics as a subject. I want to bring that, logisticians, right? I want to bring that in too. So Swapnil, your thoughts on this API world that's going to democratize everything?
So I think about a little bit about almost digital literacy. Yes. And in the sense that if I look at my own example, I was a metallurgical engineer, went to business school, worked in manufacturing, and ended up building a logistics technology company. And there is a lot of learning that happened along the way. And I feel when I work with our teams, our engineers, I didn't understand before. And when I think about this API economy, I think as a manager and a leader, one of the first things I had to learn was I used to lead and manage our engineering team just like I led a manufacturing ops team before. And very quickly I realized I can't do that. It's a totally different demographic. They come. So this idea and this expertise, right, in a way to how do you even as a manager and leader operate in this environment? I feel that transition it wasn't easy for me. And I don't think it's going to be as easy for the rest of the world that are somewhat in to some extent, for a lack of a better word, either in the old economy or a traditional economy. They got to transition into this world and a little bit around exposure around even we all talk about eventually we'll all have to code. And I think coding, it's going to look a lot different. But what it really means is, I think our exposure and ability to deal with this change that is happening and manage and lead in that environment, to me, that's going to be quite significant.
It is significant. It's going to be a drag and drop code. I mean, people talk about low code, no code. And I'm sure that platforms like yours will help managers in ITC or any other place, right? Just drop and drag functions, right? and link to the entire network very easily. And I'm sure guys watching this, those who don't want to code, don't worry, it's going to be low code, no code. It's going to be very simple for you in the future. I want thoughts from Vikram and Vishal on these things too. But Vishal, perhaps you could tell me how is this open API economy shaping up? Do you see that happening in India? I know in America there's a big movement. And Vikram, would appreciate your thoughts also, please.
So, I think, let me try to answer. There'll be three different types of jobs. I'm just sort of trying to broadly say. At the front line, experience will become commoditized. What do I mean by that? Earlier, if you were in a warehouse and you were implementing a business, you could get 3-4 months to implement a business. You teach people and they learn. Today, we are expected to go live in 6 weeks, sometimes even less, 4 weeks. And because of the use of technology and a lot of the API integrations and very solid standardization and just the tools that are available, you can get someone up and running within days. Okay, so that has big implications for the ability for us to scale up, scale down, and a vast pool of manpower in our country being trained on this, and they get experience and they can move from side to side. So it will aid in employment because you don't need a long gestation period to learn something. You can move. So that's really, really good. Second thing is that the use of data and data science, and for everyone who's out there, you will need to have people who are familiar with data and the use of data and how to use data for decision making. That's the second type of skill sets that are going to be needed. The third and probably the most prized skill set that's going to be needed is how to solution. Because if you're going to be able to execute, and if you move from logistics being just a sort of from a cost to a competitive advantage, then tying different elements together and making the seamless transition work requires solutioning and creativity. So I would say three different sort of important skill sets emerging at the front line. It'll become easier to scale up, scale down, and that's great. Facility with data science or data tools. And third will be creativity and imagination, which in the past, perhaps you wouldn't have associated logistics as much with it. And, of course, this is being underpinned by the technology shifts that are taking place.
That's really well said and very encouraging. I think a lot of the people watching this, perhaps parents watching this, logisticians, right? Logisticians is a great kind of segue into your career. You don't have to really think about mechanical engineering or civil engineering. Perhaps specialize in logistics management. It's a great point that you make, Vishal. That's great. Vikram, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, so I think great points already made, and I won't repeat them. I will add to them just maybe two other perspectives, right? One is, I think, if you think of the number of people involved in logistics, right? Whether it's in companies, supervisors, people running the warehouse, people running the trucks, the truckers themselves, their life is quite difficult, right? And as a large country, if we really want to grow, the topic of financial inclusion is not new to all of us. I mean, it's something that's been going around, right? Now, imagine the future when all these people are on a common platform, right? Data about what they are doing, how much they are earning is all available, of course, within privacy laws, right? I think one big shift that will happen is a high degree of inclusion. Today, if you're a small trucker with one truck trying to buy the second one, it's incredibly difficult to get financing, right? You get very high cost loans, low LTVs, and so on. But the moment that information around what kind of business you have, how regular it is, becomes available, right? It opens up access to credit. Think of a truck driver. I mean, today, for that person to really improve the lot of his family, educational loans will be very difficult to get, right? But tomorrow, if the earning is clear on a platform, it's so much easier to get. So basically, I would just say financial inclusion goes up and broader inclusion goes up. And I think that will really move the economy up, right, over some years. I think the second thing I would like to talk about is, the pace of innovation, right? A lot has been said around new capabilities, new skills, being able to ingest and consume data, build analytics of it, the improved roles of logisticians. But I think fundamentally what will happen today, if somebody is in India is a very innovative country, right? If an innovation today is happening in Karnataka, the odds that it will reach every corner of the country in the next 5 years is zero, right? Whereas when you have a large part of this ecosystem on shared platforms, the pace with which you can drive up innovation and hence productivity, hence lives, hence cost and lower cost, right, will just increase manifold. So I think the two things I would add is one, including these people who are typically unbanked, many of them, right, into the formal economy is one big benefit. And the second big benefit is just driving the pace of innovation and hence productivity.
Well said. Well said. Raghu, this pace of innovation that we're talking about, right? Is it driven by customers, consumers, end consumers who want it today, the instant gratification? The millennial generation, are they saying, "I want the product now"? I discovered it online. I want to experience it right now. Is that what's been driving this platform thinking, visibility, transparency, that everything else that follows with it, collaboration, and therefore data and analytics to serve them faster?
Not necessarily. It's a combination of things, and I think I would say three large things. The first one is the structure of the market in itself. Yeah. So if you had to try to summarize what everyone else was saying, in our mindset, it is consolidated and organized, or fragmented and disorganized. Yeah, these are the two axes with which we think. Whereas what the opportunity opens up is, it is still fragmented, but you can get organized. I think that's the first big network, effect which can actually bring to the table. I guess the second effect is that of, we all know, and Vishal was, Vikram was talking about the amount of empty trucks and empty mileages and all that. I think we first of all are sitting on a huge efficiency opportunity. Whether the efficiency opportunity is systemic, which is external, or within an organization, waiting times and the amount of friction which exists in every point. I think all of that, is a second big opportunity, which is driving the digitalization and the entire platform thinking. I think the third element is the consumer expectation. I think today consumers are demanding an experience which is significantly different. I think it's all the three together which is actually driving the platformization and the 4.0 thinking, which I think is very good, and it is actually very promising as well.
And are there a lot of mistakes made in that journey? I mean, while you look at this platform approach, is it like learn fast, fail fast kind of approach?
Yeah, I think everyone is scaling up. I think we are still we are still a part of the growth curve. I think we still need to move a significant step up. I think the level of adoption can be significantly better than what we have reached today. Every year the level of adoption is increasing, but I guess we still have a opportunity to bridge the gap. I think that's what I would say. I mean, fail fast, learn fast. That's the nature of the game, right? So you can't help it, and it's even more complex in this particular situation. So that's natural.
Yeah,
that's how the game would be.
Vikram, I was reading one of the reports from your organization, right? That apparently it takes 5 years to build a 100 crore brand or something now, less than that maybe, right? And digital is very much a part of this growth, right? So because a lot of these young entrepreneurs are watching this, and perhaps Vishal, Swapnil can come in also on this. How should they look at logistics today in terms of this move fast? Like Raghu said, this failing is the name of the game. You will fail for sure in many things. But how do you ensure that you move fast in this generation? Use logistics to a competitive advantage. Should I employ a logistics manager, a guy who understands logistics tech? Is there a specialized operation here? Because most of the founders are looking at the product. They're very good at product, but they forget that distribution is a whole different ballgame. That's why they're failed. So I want your thoughts on this. Vishal, Swapnil, keep your thoughts ready. Also, Vikram, over to you.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a very complex question, and I can speak for a long time at it, but I'll try and compress it in a minute. I think fundamentally, if you are a young entrepreneur trying to build whatever it is, some service, some product, the place to start is, what is the customer experience you're trying to deliver, right? You look at that customer experience, you think through all the frictions, you think through how you can beat either an existing service or even a generic competitor that you're trying to beat, and then you set the standard, right? And then think about how you'll solve for it. I think this way of thinking is now taking over. I mean, we consult with many brands, young and old, and how they should actually use this approach to think of disrupting markets. When you're fundamentally disrupting markets, you don't start with assets that you have in the process that you have. You start with the customer, you start with the person's unmet needs, the frictions, and think of how to disrupt it, right? The good news, at least when it comes to the realm of supply chain and logistics, is I see many, many great companies, right? Of course, Freight Tiger is one, but there are a few more that are actually trying to do something in this space, right? And I would build on it. So don't try and do everything yourself. I mean, we could very easily see a future situation where every brand thinks of this whole B2B commerce and figuring out how they can solve it themselves and create their own platform. That's an inefficient way of progressing. I think when the dust settles, there will be 3 or 4 such platforms that would cover most of India. So the real question is, can you find complementary people, complementors, right? That you can use then to fix frictions in the experience that you're trying to deliver. That's how I would suggest people go about it. I know it's a little high level, but like I said, we can talk for a long time on this and still not cover even half the subject.
Well said. Well said. Vishal, your thoughts on this subject, please.
I think it starts from the competitive strategy that the founders are trying to. If you start from the strategy and say if logistics is core to the success of strategy, then you definitely need to have some in-house competence, and you need to have in-house competence as you scale up. The second thing you need to do is you need to have good partnerships. You really do need to think about collaboration. There's no way you can in-source everything or do everything on your own. So your mindset has to be from get-go in terms of partnerships and what parts of the whole supply chain that you want to in-source and manage, and what do you want to outsource. So have a clear idea about it. It's not that straightforward, and therefore there are obviously help available, and look for the partnerships that can help you scale up and who have the ability to work with you, have the right kind of mindset. So yeah, I would say those would be the 2 things. Look for its place in your competitive strategy. Definitely, if it's core in-source, have the right partnerships, and obviously, as Vikram said, there are companies that are out there, big and small, technology companies or physical companies that can help make it happen. So that would be my advice.
Right, Swapnil, when the technology piece comes in, right, most of the founders say that there's so many technology companies going after them. How do you ask them to choose when it comes to logistics?
You want the platform to be neutral, in the sense that a neutral platform will be able to proliferate and work with many partners versus the platform that is in a way not neutral. That's one of the things. Second is, as we talked about, ultimately the network you have on a logistics platform or a technology platform, the network carries a lot of weight. So you need a certain level of depth in the network to really build these efficiencies. So I would look at what does the network look like today, where it could be down the line, and would that give me a competitive advantage because I have access to that network without having to invest in building that network in-house. It's a little bit like the way we've seen UPI or the payment infrastructure that got evolved in the country. And our promise, when I look at Freight Tiger, our promise is, look, if you want logistics to be a bullet train for your operations, somebody got to lay down the tracks. And Freight Tiger is playing that role to lay down the tracks so that you can run your bullet train on it. That's how we look at it. There is an element of collaboration, transparency that is very important. One of my customers made me realize this. In the early days, they said, when I was just starting out, it's so incredible where this customer said, look, if you are successful as a platform, in a way, you have a lot of responsibility. And ultimately, as much as you want to build your business, you want to make sure that you're creating enough value for others in the ecosystem. And to some extent, Vishal, this is a little old school, but it all comes down to values, right, at the end of the day. And beyond the expertise, network, technology, all of it, you want to make sure that your values align, and you want to partner with someone or a company where I think that makes sense.
No, that's a great point. And I want to talk about that's values, ethics, very important, and something that can be easily understood, right? And partners, long-term partnerships, very important. Raghu, I want to talk to you about these fancy words that perhaps a lot of other people come and throw at you. You'll say AI, IoT, machine learning, and as a person who's managed supply chain for 3 decades, right? How do you look at all these new technologies, especially AI? Everybody seems to be using it. Even today, brand managers say, why can't we use AI to understand what our brand affinity is to customers, right? How do you know that somebody is bullshitting you or not? I'm asking you this because everybody bandies around these words now.
No, there is clearly there is a role of technology, and I don't think I think it's not just a hype. There's clear value addition, and there are solutions which you can do today. So each one of them. So whether you are calling it as AI, which includes machine learning and all that, or the entire data and the analytics around it, and how do you just take raw data, how do you transform it into meaningful insights and then trigger actions around it using various things. Using the entire execution system. I think there's a huge, first there's a huge potential. To be honest, there's absolutely no doubt about that. I don't think people are throwing, yes, there can be a jargon at one layer deeper, on this stack and that stack, but at the higher level, saying these things would unlock value. It is very clear, demonstrated. And whoever has gone down the path has only unlocked value. There's no question at all about that. And again, I want to go back, the kind of work which Freight Tiger does, or what a platform helps you to unlock. I think you cannot solve it in any other way. So therefore, it definitely opens up a huge efficiency opportunity. Like what Vikram said, net, if you're talking about a market which is a 14% cost, logistics cost as a percentage of GDP, and if it comes down to even 11% or 10%, the kind of efficiency it unlocks is significant, and it is, I think, central to the entire economy becoming competitive.
Yeah. Vishal, your thoughts on all these technologies quickly?
Yeah. So I would say if you think about logistics as matching supply and demand at a very core, demand is always very random. Supply can be very disruptive, and the industry generates a lot of data. So obviously, as Raghu is rightly saying, it lends itself to a lot of technology adoption, machine learning, AI insights. However, the role of creativity, the role of collaboration absolutely remains. And to the point, Swapnil will probably be the best person to talk about the kind of data that they've generated and the insights. And I think the what is happening is that the technologies are allowing for more creativity and better solutions to come, because the ability to crunch and build scenarios has absolutely improved. And the last point I want to say is that because the industry generates a lot of transactional data, it also lends itself to, again, a lot of the RPA processes or machine learning and so on and so forth. So yeah, there will be efficiency aspect to it, and there will be a creativity aspect to it that is absolutely available.
Vikram, would you agree with this? I think the trust deficit is what needs to be solved, right? And that's what all technology companies and Swapnil's company is going to go solve. Trust is very important in logistics. Make it inclusive for everybody. And your concluding thoughts, then I have one thought about advice to entrepreneurs. Raghu, Vishal, Vikram, you can bring in that subject too. Your thoughts now, Vikram, on the trust deficit, then moving on to the advice to entrepreneurs, and we'll conclude with Swapnil.
Yeah, so I mean, again, trust deficit is pretty endemic to the way the industry works today, right? I mean, today it's a highly fragmented sector. 65% of our loads are spot loads, right? Where literally people are waiting in the mandi for loads to appear, which means that any deal you do is transactional. Somebody that comes, picks you up for like 1-2 trips, and then you pick somebody else up, right? So, I mean, in this context, the intermediaries play a very critical role. So let's say I'm a shipper who's shipping something out. The transporter has to take my material away, perhaps with a truck that he's picked up from the mandi. Who provides the trust in terms of financial flows? That's the role intermediaries play, right? I think this trust deficit has to be fixed, and there are 2 points to it. 3 points maybe. One is just having all this information in one place. 2 is getting people to really look at that information and understand where they are and trust that information. And 3rd is actually fixing the financing flows, right? Because that's where the trust deficit becomes most important. If you're able to solve these 3 things, then that's the only context in which we'll really be able to organize and scale up, with Logistics 4.0. And I think Raghu said this, I said this, the market will stay fragmented, right? So how do you create trust among a zillion counterparties, right, who may not work with each other every day, is really data and financial.
Okay, when quickly, Vishal, your thoughts on this, on the trust deficit, and they say that 36% is the value loss in the Indian logistics today, especially from farm to fork. Is that largely true? I mean, this was something that I used to read about in 2005 and 6 when I used to report on the retail industry. Has that reduced at all? Is it because logistics is largely to blame for it, or is it just storage also?
I think, I mean, there are different, it will be a long answer, and there are different numbers. I think it's improving because of, advances in logistics and tracking and more awareness and a lot of technology being used to solve that problem. But yes, it absolutely still exists because of the mismatch between supply and demand. So that absolutely still exists. In terms of the trust deficit, I think the point that was made by Raghu and Vikram, that intermediaries play a critical role, and a trusted intermediary, a platform is basically a trusted intermediary that solves that. And I think that's really where the opportunity lies for companies to come in and create that platform. And all intermediaries, whether it's a freight broker or logistics companies or tech companies like Swapnil, are essentially playing that role of a trusted intermediary. And I think that recognizing the value of that is important. And one last piece of advice you asked the entrepreneurs was to, I would just repeat, if it's focused, if it's central to your strategy, don't let logistics be out of your sight. Make it core to your competitive strategy and give it a board seat, so to speak.
Fantastic. I'm going to keep that. Guys, give a board seat to the logistics person. Very important, right? And I think that's the future. Raghu, you would agree with me on this. One person cannot solve the network problem. It is a combination of all of them, people like you guys on this panel, right? Your advice to entrepreneurs, please.
Simple. So first is, think flexibly. I think, for most of the entrepreneurs, it's all about growth. And so keep customer experience in mind, and what is the customer experience you're trying to deliver? First one. Second one is understand flexibility, because adding up a lot of assets or fixing yourself into one way of working can be very, very detrimental somewhere down the line. So think flexibly and see what can help you to meet your today's needs, but at the same time pivot very quickly into the future. These two things I would clearly put in mind, and therefore all the designs which you think of for your flows should keep this flexibility in mind.
Vikram, your thoughts on advice to entrepreneurs before moving on and concluding with Swapnil?
So I guess I will have to repeat what Vishal and Raghu said, but two things: start with customer experience, solve for it. Within that, think about frictions. Point one. Second is, when you're solving for those frictions, don't try and do everything yourself. I like the way Vishal put it. If logistics and supply chain is indeed very core to your business you're setting up, then be more involved. But otherwise, work with players that are actually trying to organize this sector. Because if you continue trying to do things yourself, you will not, organize the sector, just fragment it further.
That's wonderfully said. And therefore, guys, people like Freight Tiger, Swapnil's company, takes a long-term view. It balances the needs of different stakeholders. It builds trust and brings value prop to all the stakeholders. Swapnil, your concluding remarks, and we'll call it a close.
Oh, thank you. So first of all, thank you so much for, everyone. It's been great to be on this, with the part of this group. If I build a little bit on what all of you said is, one of the things early on, one of our customers pointed us to is, in a way, think about your customer's customer, and that just changes the equation. So if you're an entrepreneur or a founder, as you think about your customer, which is very important, it kind of helps to think about your customer's customer. And if you start with that, and then what are the things you can do to enhance your customer's customer experience, I think is very, very powerful. It goes, a lot of my training early on was in Toyota production systems. I used to implement Lean Six Sigma in logistics. And if you go to any Toyota facility for that matter, and there is a value stream map in every facility, and it starts with the customer. And we got to think like literally a step beyond, right? Customer's customer. And all these companies, if we look at FMCG or pharma, cement, steel, when we think about the dealers and distributors of all those companies and how do you enhance their experience, and then the impact it has, because most of those are SMEs in our country. And if you're able to build a certain level of customer experience to them, you are making a tremendous impact on these end users. So to think about customer, and also to think about the impact you can have as a founder or an entrepreneur, I think is a great way to also live with sometimes the ups and downs and the time it's going to take you to build a valuable company.
Swapnil, that's one fantastic statement. Guys, watching this, you want to meet any of these gentlemen out here, get in touch with us. I'm going to put you in touch with Swapnil and everybody. And, like Vikram said, discuss this network level collaboration. Don't do it all alone. And like Vishal said, it should be a board level conversation. Bring the logistics guy on board. Take it as a strategic decision and not just as a cost saving function. And like Raghu said, none of us can change anything or do anything alone. Collaboration is the name of the game. Okay, network level collaboration is going to stay forever. It's the API economy, guys. The data led approach. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being on Your Stories Future of Work, and our lovable audience. This is the future of supply chains, frictionless logistics with collaboration. Starts here today. Send in the questions and I'll get these gentlemen to answer it for you. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great one. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.